Hi everyone and welcome to the April update for Nintex forms for Office 365. Jumping across to the community and going to the Platform Center and clicking on Release Notes, you will see under Nintex for Office 365 the Nintex forms release notes. And if you scroll down, you can see we've done a release between the 6th and the 8th of May. This includes the new web request control, decimal, currency, and number separators. That's like 1,000 separators. We've got regular expression in the text mask. There is a new message that if you navigate away from the designer, if you have unsaved changes, it'll actually warn you. We also have the duplicate button in the controls, so you can add duplicate controls. And also we support variables in visible, read-only, and required property of the config panel. So that's quite a few things to cover off. First, let's jump across to my environment here. So I've been working on a COVID-19 form, for instance, and I know there's a COVID-19 API that I can actually search on. So now we've got the web request control. So if I drag that on and just step through it, it's got some standard things like the title and the name, which come with all controls. But now we also have a service URL. Now the service URL can be the API you're going to hit, but it'll also accept parameters as well if you need to. It has the request header. It has display type of drop-down and text, the response type of JSON and XML, and the label text and value. Now if you choose text only, it'll only have the label text. If you do drop-down, it'll have label and value. So just deleting that one for a moment, let's have a look at what I've done in this one. So I've put in my service URL here of coronaapi.com countries, and I've kept the request header pretty simple. I've done a drop-down, it's JSON, and I've got my path here. So if I come to this and open it up in my browser, we'll see the JSON come back. And so I'm looking through and we're saying data, getting all of them and selecting name. So data and selecting name. So it should see Afghanistan first. So clicking on preview and we see the web request go out and get the data. And now we can see all the countries that are in this API. So the next thing we do is I actually pass the parameters from this control. Now this is something that's quite interesting because these are actually using the text short, and these are just using a single property of the response. So what I'm doing here is you can see in the service URL, it's actually a function. So this is where I can actually put in the value from the drop-down. So just removing this for a moment. So this API, if I just copy this and put this into a new, it's expecting the country code. So if I look through and find a country code, where are we? BM. So if I put BM in here, it's now gone and found the specific data for Bermuda. So what we're doing here is we're saying, well, I've got the start of my API, but it actually requires some input. It needs to know the ISO country code. So what I then do is I type in, I'm looking for the control, which is countries, which is a drop-down. Now this is the first time we've introduced a control that returns an object. Usually they're a primitive like number, date, time, string, boolean. Now an object is something that has more than one primitive. So now it's called an object. So if I clicked on countries, it still doesn't know what to do with it because it's an object. So this is the first one we can now do dot notation and have label or value. So what I actually need is not what is displayed to the user, which is the label. I actually need the behind the scenes value. So now we go update. And so just to explain that, you'll see here, this is when we selected the name, which is displayed, but we actually wanted the country code behind the scenes. So just to show how that works, we can drag on a label next to it and just show you what's coming out. So I'm going to go into here, insert, and form controls. We have it here, but we don't have a way to navigate the object, which will come soon. So I'm going to create a form variable, and I'm going to say temp will do. So we go country dot value, and output that, and you'll actually see what's coming out. So we go and create an insert. Let's go to preview and select Bermuda. There we go. So now we can see that BM comes across as its internal reference name. So that goes away, fires off with this, and finds the total confirmed COVID cases in Bermuda is 118, how many people have recovered, and also how many are in critical situation. So coming back here, it was the first API that goes and gets me the countries, and then these subsequent ones actually go and use the code, which is this value here. Alright, so coming back to here, we've also got some other changes in here. Improved number and currency control to display digit grouping. And what that basically means, if let's put on a currency control and a number control, and you go to preview. So if I put 100, 100, totally fine. But what happens when we go to 1000? It now actually puts separators in there so you can understand if it's 100, 1000, a million, so on and so forth. And so if you're in a different region, France or somewhere else, it will actually use your localized version based on the browser. So next we have the added support for using regular expressions in the text short. So if we come across to here and add the text short, now this has three different input validation now. So the first one we've got length, so that's the number of characters you can actually put in there. The second one, which is a text mask, which is like phone numbers, so if I put in a Melbourne phone number. The 999s represent numbers, and you could also put letters in there if you wanted to, so you could restrict it down to A for letters or 9 for numbers, wildcards, and also the backslash to escape. So if we come back to preview, I try and type in letters, it won't accept it. I type in numbers, it will. If I keep it too short, it also gives a warning as well. Now finally, if we come back to the designer and we go to here and we select regular expression, now this is where you can put a regular expression pattern in. Now if you're not familiar with regular expression, I'd recommend having a bit of a search around regular expression, understanding how the pattern works, because it's going to be more complex than a video I can show right now. I'm just going to copy a regular expression pattern I've got here from a customer. Now, I'll explain what this pattern actually does. So, as you can see, it's quite complex. Now, his pattern, or his or her pattern, what it's expecting is the first character, so this is saying the first character has to be one of these. Uppercase, lowercase c, or p, s, or v. The second character has to be uppercase or lowercase p. Now, the next 9 characters can be between 0 and 9. Then there's a colon. Then the next 2 characters can be between 0 and 9. So 2 characters means 0, 0 and 9, 9. So let's jump across and see how that works. Go to preview, CP, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, colon, or 4. Is an example. So I can press submit and it works fine. Now if I was to say the incorrect one, G for instance, it's actually going to tell me that value is not correct. So it's looking for a specific syntax. Now this can be good for things like serial numbers, invoice numbers, email addresses that have maybe Gmail in it, or whatever syntax that you want. It can be very, very complex and very rigid or very flexible depending on the pattern that you choose. So the next thing is added support to prompt the user to navigate away from changes. Now, if let's say I went and what should I change? Let's say let's press close. Now it's going to tell me it's very, very similar to that. It's going to actually warn me to say, are you sure you want to navigate? You're going to lose changes. That's pretty as simple as it gets. The other thing you might have noticed is the control now all has a duplicate button in the designer. So coming back to here, so I'll just delete some of these controls. Now if we were doing our web request control, now these 3 were very, very similar. So if you look here, they're just really looking at different properties, confirmed, recovered, or critical. And so again, if I wanted to do critical, I just copy it and I'd change that node in there to something else. So that clone button works for a single control, or you might actually have a group of controls here. So if I put all these in together, get rid of that one, now I can actually clone that whole group as well. And finally, the support for variables visibility, read-only, and required in the config panel. So let's say the title control, as you can see here, visible, read-only, and required. So that comes from SharePoint, so let's ignore that one for a moment. Let's say this one. This is a better example. So required, visible, read only. So it used to be a toggle and now it's a drop down. And the reason why it's a drop down is we wanted to get this insert tab to be easily clickable. A toggle was just a bit too small. So now it's yes or no, which are the same options you had before. But now you also have the insert tab here. So rather than it being required, I'm going to make it a bit more obvious to say read only. I can go insert. Now this could be anything you choose. It could be get query string parameter, for instance, and get name. Now if the name didn't match, it's going to set it to read only, for instance. So let's do something simple like you could do something really simple like put a checkbox on there. So let's say let's put a checkbox. So checkbox if yes no, and we'll just call it yes no. Now what we want to say is maybe this one here, if it's the checkbox is yes, so if yes no is equal to true, so if it's checked it's going to return yes. Now if the yes no is unticked, it returns false. So it depends on how your syntax, how you really build this. It could be if today is Tuesday, if the query string parameter equals you, and if this string contains something, then you might disable or make something read only. So let's go to preview and we can see everything working. Clicking no, and it's disabled that. Now you could argue you could do the same thing in rules. So for instance, you could go form rules. You could say disable country drop down. So you could say if yes no is yes, then countries read only is yes, else countries read only is no. Now immediately you can actually see that that was a little bit more long-winded than just doing it in the config panel, but it really depends on the complexity you require. So this is really just self-contained down to the we should actually remove that and make sure this actually worked. So preview. So that's the rule executing now. So it depends. If you want something quick and easy, you can do it through here. Or if you need something more complex, you could come through here. And the beauty of this is you could have lots of conditions in the if, but also you could be setting different things like you might be setting the color of countries to a different color, for instance. You might say control fill is going to be this color. So it's really just around visibility, read only required. If you need something more advanced than that, changing the title or the background color or multiple controls at the same time, I'd still recommend using rules. So if we come back to preview, we'll see that change hopefully. There we go. So that's the release for April, which came out on May. So we usually bundle up all our things in the end of April and they get shipped out at the start of May. So I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments. Cheers.